friends, it's Jasmine, and I hope that you all have been doing well. If you're new to my channel, welcome. It's good to see you here. I make like witchy content and ramble and babble about traditional witchcraft, the craft, folklore, paganism, and just the weird stuff that I'm into. So if you're interested in that, stick around, maybe check out some of my other videos here on the channel. If you are a returning subscriber, it's good to see you back as well. I hope that you enjoy this video. Make sure that you give this video a like if you like it, hit subscribe if you would like to see more of me, and make sure that you hit the bell to stay notified for every time that I upload. So in today's video, I really want to talk about Agatha All Along, which is a show that I feel like is really captivating the minds and hearts of so many modern witches. And I will say that this whole Agatha All Along universe is completely new to me. I still have yet to watch WandaVision, so I need to check that out too. But I got sort of called into this universe through a couple of friends recommending that I check out Agatha All Along, which I'm sure is available on like different platforms. I know that Disney Plus has it, allegedly, and for entertainment purposes only from what I've heard through the grapevine. It's also available to watch on a site called Dope Box. I don't know how true that is, of course, because this is for entertainment purposes only, but maybe check out those platforms if you're interested in watching Agatha All Along. This video, I'm not gonna like necessarily be doing a review of Agatha All Along. I wanna talk about sort of something very specific within the TV show, which is known as the Witch's Ballad. But first, I think it's important to sort of define some terms before we get started. So I am currently in my year 3 of the Red Thread Academy, and one of my assignments was covering Mythopoesis. And I don't know if you're familiar with this word or not, so I'll kind of read you the definition. Mythopoeia, or Mythopoesis, is a subgenre of speculative fiction and a theme in modern literature and film, where an artificial or fictionalized mythology is created by the writer of prose, poetry, or other literary forms. The concept, which long pre-existed him, was widely popularized by J.R.R. So mythopoetic fantasy is a form of literature that essentially has the structure, look, and feel of a myth, but is in fact contemporary creation rather than a story passed down through tradition. However, I would definitely argue that even to the extent, and I know that this might sound blasphemous or subversive to some, but I would argue that even many of our holy books at one time started off as modern. And through centuries of practice and belief, orthodoxy and orthopraxy, they have become mythology. They have become folklore because culture and religion is shaped by this. So how does this really apply to witchcraft? Well, I think that for us as witches, we can pull on the threads of magic from many different sources. Some of that including pop culture. And I personally have felt very inspired to sort of pull on some of the magical threads that are found interwoven throughout Agatha All Along. And I also am a firm believer that there's hardly anything original under the sun. Thoughts and ideas and archetypes just kind of get re-expressed through different people's perspectives and lenses. And the Witch's Ballad, which refers to the witch's road that is in Agatha All Along, and it's a central theme of the show. This coven of witches that are walking this literal and metaphorical road. I feel as like a real witch in the real world, we have a concept of the crooked path, the witch's way, the spiral path that is both literal and poetic. The spiral path being sort of a metaphor for our journey as witches and how we continuously revisit elements and spirits and ideas that we thought we previously had already gleaned the deepest mysteries from, only to revisit them and glean even further into those mysteries. The crooked path, I feel, is very much a metaphor for that crooked, winding road of morality that we as witches sort of weave between the pillars of mercy and severity, of all that's foul and all that's fair, which is a direct lyric also from the Witch's Ballad. The Witch's Way, the crooked path, is a symbolic metaphor for our journey as witches throughout our lives. But I also believe that it is a literal access point in the other world and the midworld as well. So with all that being said, we are going to sort of channel some mythopoesis from Agatha All-Along's The Witch's Ballad in this video. And I am going to take you basically line by line through the ballad, and we together are going to explore some of the deeper meaning and mysteries sort of woven throughout these lyrics. I'm really interested to hear what you think of this. If there are other songs that you are interested in me sort of doing this witch's dive between the lyrics in, comment down below and let me know. And let me know what you think of my understanding and my interpretation of this ballad and how it resonates with you. You have some notes here as well. I have made this into a full document because, like I said, this was part of one of my assignments. I have shared my written interpretation over on my Patreon. My Patreon link is down below, and there's several different tiers. Some of the perks of being subscribed to my Patreon is personal one-on-one mentorship. Some of the other perks is early access to all of my content, as well as exclusive content to videos and some of my personal writings that I actually put in my Book of Shadows. So if you're interested in seeing some of my practice reflected in writing, make sure to check out my Patreon. So the ballad, which I am also going to link down below, I'm not going to be playing the song for copyright reasons. However, I will leave a link to the ballad down below, and I suggest that if you haven't heard it, you go and give it a listen maybe after watching this video. So the ballad starts off with a line that says, "Seekest thou the road to all that's foul and fair?" I've kind of mentioned previously already, I really believe that this road is a metaphor for the crooked path of the traditional witch, known by many names, right? Some call this the spiral path or the witch's way, but I strongly believe that this lyric, "Seekest thou the road to all that's foul and fair," is referring to the crooked path. This witch's road is both foul and fair, as is our magic. The fruits of bless and bane grow from the same stalk, as they say. Our powers as witches can be used both for benedictions as well as maledictions. The effects of our workings can also be both good and not so good. We as witches are foul and fair in of ourselves. We're a reflection of nature, which can be cruel and unrelenting and unforgiving, or it can be very nurturing and healing and gentle. And I think that for traditional witches, that is sort of a symbolic aspect of how we use the craft to be both foul and fair as we seekest the road. The next quote, "Gather sisters fire, water, earth, and air." That just makes me get like goose flesh. Well, really this whole ballad does. These are the elements of creation, earth, air, fire, water. Each element is foundational in all things in the midworld and beyond. As witches, we weave with them all. A balanced coven would have a healthy mix of all of these elements, both literally and metaphorically, kind of like the offices or specialties that are held within a traditional coven. A coven needs to have all of these aspects because having just one in prominence would be kind of difficult, like trying to operate a coven with 7 wardens. Someone needs to serve as a votary. Or having a coven entirely made out of oracles, while poetic and mystical as that might sound, also sounds like we would often just like totally have our head in the clouds and be so connected to the upper, other, or underworlds that not a lot would get done in the midworld. And the same is to be said for the elements. These elemental associations of earth, air, fire, water, of course, are inherently ingrained in us through our planetary correspondences. I'm an air sun with a water moon. We also need to have these elements embodied within our magic, weaving with the properties and the elements of earth, air, fire, and water. Not that I'm necessarily into sort of the cliche labels of like green witch and red witch and cosmic witch and whatever, because I just view all of that inherently as part of traditional craft. We need to be able to weave with them all. And it's common for individual witches or covens to maybe have a draw towards one element, maybe more than others. I know that because I am an air sun and a water moon, I feel very, very drawn to those elements. But that doesn't mean that I exclusively work with those elemental paradigms. And I think that can be true kind of across the board. Many of us, again, might feel a draw towards a particular element, but it's all of the elements together that really make magic what it is. And a fully functioning, healthy, operative coven needs one of every kind. And the show in Agatha All Along sort of depicts that. Albeit a little bit in like a cliche way of like, oh, there's the coven's protection witch and the coven's healing witch and the coven's this and that witch. But I think that there is some truth in that. A coven can greatly benefit by someone that's, specialized and versed in divinatory practices like an oracle, or the creation of ritual artifacts and items, sort of like an artisan. Or also offensive and defensive magic, someone that's skilled in the art of warding, like a warden, a votary, like a priestess. Having all of these aspects together is what makes a coven so unique to pretty much all other spiritual aspects, groups, and practices. Because when you are in a coven, you are not going to church and like listening to a sermon from someone at the pulpit. You are actively engaging in your own practice and religion of the craft, and it takes one of every kind to make that flow. The next quote, "Darkest hour, wake thy power, earthly and divine." The darkest hour, the witching hour. I think that the ballad here is possibly suggesting a timestamp on when to open and access the road and how to. We know that we already need one of every kind. But also time of day wise, the witching hour, we'd be looking at between midnight and 3 o'clock in the morning, depending on your variables, your tradition. But for the most part, the witching hour falls within that time frame. I do also want to just note that a difference that I see within the Agatha All Along universe and lore of how Covenry is shaped versus the real world. The crooked path, the witch's way, the spiral path, in Agatha All Along is only accessible through a group of witches, that it requires more than just the individual witch to access it. And I do think that that is a difference in reality here in the midworld, because there are many solitary witches that, although they're not in a coven, I don't believe that means that they cannot access the road. But as someone who is in a tradition, who is in a coven, and who has coven experience and group ritual experience, as well as, of course, practicing as a solitary witch for a little over a decade now, I will say that it is significantly different when you are working in a group and walking the road shared with coven mates versus walking it by yourself. And not that one is necessarily better than the other, because covens can be really toxic and damaging and sometimes even maybe hold people back. But I like to use the metaphor that there is strength in numbers, and that is a truth, objectively. If I were to pull up in your driveway with a truckload of, let's say, 3,000 red bricks, and I dump them all in your driveway, and I tell you that you have 6 hours for you to move all of these bricks, for you to get your car out of the driveway, doing that yourself might take a lot longer. It might be a lot more exhausting and draining. You might even have to use a bit of covenry and find a way to work around it. Like maybe you don't even really move the bricks and you decide to take your car off-road, and your car suffers the consequences if it's not built and prepared for that off-road sort of experience. I think that this applies to covens as well, because if that same situation were to apply and you had, let's say, 8, 7, 13 of your friends or helpers with you moving those bricks, you would get out a lot faster and without having to exert as much as your personal energy as you would if you were doing this all by yourself. So I would suggest just kind of thinking about that and what does that mean to you to walk the road as a solitary, as I know that many of you are, and many of you I know are in traditions and groups, and what does it mean to have people walking by your side on the road? But back to the darkest hour, wake thy power, earthly and divine, we're talking about the witching hour. And this is a timestamp on when to open this way to the road. Both earthly and cosmic forces being channeled and strengthened by this rite, as well as being drawn in. Spirits of the land and spirits of the sky, right? The Vanir, the Asir, the gods, the spirits of the earth. I believe that this particular quote is also sort of an invitation to the spirits and powers that be of the land and sky, spirits and gods, to attend, to wake them, and to petition them for their hand in this work. Quote, burn and brew with Coven true, and glory shall be thine. To burn and brew, to spend time cultivating this magic, to work it and to knead it like one would dough. To be diligent in practice, both as a solitary witch and within the practices of a coven. Glory will be to the coven that performs this rite. Glory will be to those who walk the road. This rite is literal in the way of an otherworldly road reached via witch flight. Which, shameless self-promotion here, I wrote a book about witch flight. It's on Amazon. If you're interested in learning more about astral travel from a traditional witch's perspective, check out Ambrosia's book of witch flight, available on Amazon. So the rite being literal in a way of an otherworldly road reached via witch flight. Also metaphorical of the coven's journey that is shared through their experiences of working together. This brings to mind the notion of the craft mystery, which is the sword that cuts both ways, or in perfect love and perfect trust. Something that is difficult for large groups to actually truly embody and achieve. Glory, as a special note to those that, glory shall be thine to those that walk the road. To make a special note here, I was talking about this with one of my friends and also with some coven mates, and they had some interesting feedback that I'm going to include in here too. One of them pointed out that glory shall be thine, as in glory will be the groups, not simply one individual person is able to attain the glory, but rather a group of people through shared experiences will receive glory in doing so. The next part of the ballad, we have a chant, and this chant is actually said 3 different times throughout the ballad. Down, down, down the road, down the witch's road is said 3 times in a full chant. Also, the syllables that we have there, down, down, down the road, 3 downs, down the witch's road said 3 times. So we have elements of like the power of 3. And as the ballad goes on, the first time they say this chant versus the second and third time, the energy of their collective will is reflected very differently. And I think that that's actually something important to point out in the witch's ballad. Chanting in unison to bring about opening the road, manifesting and visualizing, successfully journeying as a group down the witch's road, down the crooked path. In the first round that this is said, it starts more as a rhythmic harmony where witches are jumping into the chant at different intervals and at different pitches. They're not all altos. Also, the first time they say this chant, the coven is not fully harmonized with each other because they're starting to raise a cone of power. A cone of power being this ritualistic aspect of quite literally raising the energy and climaxing it and bringing it back down into the ritual space within a circle or a witch's compass. The next quote, circle sown with fate, unlock thy hidden shrine. Here, the coven is casting a circle all together as a group. And in doing so, we are crossing and linking our individual hex threads. And hex threads is this idea that are three souls of the witch, the white, red, and the black, coming together to form the witch's soul. That our soul, our energy, can be pulled like a thread. And in a coven, these threads of anima, these threads of our life essence, are linked with other witches in our coven, as that is what is a part of Covenry. It's sharing that soul energy, that soul experience. It's sharing the magic, the spirits, and the traditions with each other. And in a way, by linking all of our hex threads together, we are forming a sort of spiritual circle amongst us. By crossing and linking our individual hex threads to each other as a way to connect our spirits in order to wield, contain, and harness even more powerful magics. This would be done via the power of numbers, and in doing so, we open the gate to the road. Multiple threads make up a tapestry, not just one color. Again, meaning you need one of every kind in a coven in order to lend all of the strengths of the various aspects of magic into a group work. And this also ties into the previous lyric, burn and brew with coven true, that mystery of the sword that cuts both ways, that perfect love, that perfect trust, and how trust can be easily broken and how it can cut you, and so can love, and how hard it is for a group as it increases in size to maintain the virtue of perfect love and perfect trust within a group, because it requires that to be shared with everyone's hex threads linked together. If you have two or more people that do not share that link between their hex threads, then it's no longer a circle. You're making more of like a U shape where magic is not contained and the energy can seep in between the peoples whose hex threads are not as tightly wound. Because by linking our hex threads, we are literally forming a circle amongst each other. Next quote, marching ever forward neath the wooded shrine. There's a lot to unpack with this quote. Once you begin your walk on the road, there is no going back. There is no removing from memory or experience one has as a witch. Initiations cannot be undone or erased as they are cemented in the past through memory. One may only venture forward on the road. Neath the wooded shrine, to me, perhaps, suggests a metaphor for the hollowed woods. The hollowed woods being this place in the other world that many a traditional witch has experienced. Maybe they call it a sacred grove or something other than the hollowed woods, like we call it in our coven, but this is the same sort of liminal wooded space. I believe neath the wooded shrine is a metaphor for the hollowed woods. That's where the gateway to the road begins. The hollowed woods being a place that many trad witches venture to and from in their otherworldly dealings. The road lies within the wood. This also could be a suggestion of the witch's tree, the axis mundi, as a guiding post for the entrance of the road. This harkens also to the historical reference of how witches around the world be meeting up in the wood, okay? Like the witches of Benevento from Aradia, the Gospel of Witches, this sacred black walnut tree. Also, the witch's tree that we have here in our city in Irvington and the lore and history that is surrounded with that. Or the witch's tree in Louisville, Kentucky, and the lore that is surrounded with that. Okay, we are back. I had a little interruption, but we're back. So let's get back into this. So I stray not from the path. I hold death's hand in mine. I love this lyric. Venturing off the road or straying from the path could put the safety of the witch in jeopardy, as we see in Agatha all along. I know personally many a witch who have lost their way on the road. And just for the record, that includes myself. Like there have been times in my practice where I feel like I have lost my way on the road and had to find my way back to the road. And I think that this really applies in a lot of craft sort of philosophy. Arcane can create. Some even die. Again, I know this to be true. I have seen firsthand, if we're talking about, witches that practice really, really far into the malefic arts, sometimes they end up spiraling into a type of like spiritual psychosis where they view everything as a threat that needs to be met with extreme force. You know, instead of using a hammer to get the nail into the wall, it's like they're using a bulldozer, you know? And vice versa, like witches that completely are blinded by the light, where they're filled with ego and zealotry and they can't see the forest from the trees kind of thing. And I think that the same can be said for different schools of magic, having inherently more dangers to them, like void magic, for instance, really relies upon the insanity of the practitioner to be able to rip apart worlds and call upon eldritch horrors. I'm not saying that like anything is necessarily off limits, but there are systems of magic that are inherently a little bit more dangerous than others. Walking the witch's road is not a casual endeavor. Death literally lingers around every corner, and this is like literal, but it's also metaphorical. We must acknowledge that we shake its hand as well as fully know what we are signing up for when we walk the road. I think this also applies with like substance use within the craft and how witches can lose their way on the road through that. I think it also applies in a way, and talking with my friends about this mythopoesis, with how we as witches are so connected with the realm of spirit, which includes the dead, tying this back to our red soul. And so I hold death's hand in mine, I think is also symbolic of the connection of necromancy interwoven throughout traditional witchcraft and working with the dead. The next quote, "Primal night giveth sight, familiar by thy side." Primal night, the dead of night, again, the witching hour. This feels very two of swords to me. We are to navigate the road not by our eyes, but by our eye. Intuition be our guiding lamp in darkness. Kind of like to see in darkness requires that lantern from the Hermit card within Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot. If you're familiar with the tarot, the Hermit card, that major arcana card, depicts this hermit with a lantern out like this. And the light of his lantern only illuminates what is directly in front of him. And I think that that's similar to this mystery within Agatha all along's The Witch's Ballad with Primal Night Giveth Sight. You know, we are using that lantern of the hermit. We are using our second sight to illuminate the road ahead, that it's not something to be seen necessarily with our literal eyes, but with our eye. And then also folklorically, witches have pacted and worked with an array of spirits, not just including the dead, but also otherworldly spirits or familiars as well. So familiar by thy side to me is kind of like the spirits that walk with the witch on the road. Maybe not for the entirety of their journey, but at different intervals, we have different familiars by our side that are supporting us as we walk the road. The next quote, "If one be gone, we carry on, spirit as our guide." The ballad suggests that inevitably a coven will lose witches, as referenced earlier. Maybe by misfortune or by the road splitting and witches going in different directions on the road. The road is not always meant to be traveled in its entirety with the same group. Things change, people change, life happens, shit happens, shift happens. The spirits will guide us all should we keep a good spirit court and have ears that can listen and an eye that can see. A spirit court kind of being a tradcraft term for the court of our spirit guides. That might include ancestors, folkloric spirits, otherworldly spirits, gods, right? And spirit as our guide, I think also harkens back to familiar by thy side, that we are never truly, even if we're not in a coven, if we leave a coven or if we're never part of a coven as we walk the road, the spirits are still by our side and the spirits are still our guide. And I also think that this harkens to the experience of initiating into a coven and then cord cutting later to walk the road as a solitary. Even if you have left the coven, you are still not alone on the road, as one, I believe the road has a sort of spirit in of itself, like a genus loci of the road. But I also think, again, familiar by thy side, our spirits walk with us. And if one be gone, we carry on, I think sort of speaks to the fact that covens are not cults. And initiated into a coven doesn't necessarily need to be like a life sentence or anything. You can spend a season as an initiated witch within a coven. And there are vows and oaths that are taken upon initiation, and that would vary from coven to coven. But any coven that doesn't have a way out, that's dangerous. So for those of you who might be interested in walking the road with others, there needs to be kind of a built-in way in via initiation, but there also needs to be an acknowledged built-in way out via like a cord-cutting ritual and appointed times on when that is appropriate and how that is done, because otherwise that covenry becomes like shackles of a cult, and that's not healthy. So again, like earlier, we have that chant, down, down, down the road, down the witch's road, which is said 3 times. And in this summoning of this road, there is a noticeable increase in power amongst the coven and Agatha all along. By the second chanting this 3-line verse, the coven kind of is demonstrating that they've cemented the connection with their hex threads, whereas before it was just kind of beginning to build as they enter the chant at different intervals. Now there's a noticeable connection between the witches and their hex threads. Also, I think this harkens to sort of this climax of this raise of power through a cone of power, where we're building energy, we're harnessing energy, we're drawing ritual down. So the next quote, blood and tears and bone, maiden mother crone. That just kind of gives me chills. And I know that the MMC as an archetype within modern craft right now is kind of popular as a topic, and digging up Robert Graves's work, The White Goddess, and people putting stock into that archetype, people discrediting that archetype. We're not going to go into that in this video. But by blood and tears and bone, I see this as we will shed blood by walking the road. The road is long and at times difficult to traverse. We will suffer loss, we will experience grief, and there will be death and hardship, and that's a promise that the road gives us. However, like earlier, it will be worth it in the end for those who are truly meant to walk this road. For those of the blood and who are willing to shed their blood, glory will be thine. That's what the ballad says. That's what the road promises. The road promises this for those who are willing to weep for it, blood and tears. Maybe even kill for it. As in ATW, there's a craft mystery that there is no magic without sacrifice. Now, I'm not necessarily referring to unaliving other people on the road, more so as I am to the idea of like sacrifice. However, I think death, as we shake its hand in all forms, be it through sacrifice or through Malefica, is a promise that the road tells us, kind of that sword that cuts both ways. Like, it's a promise and it's a threat. It's also a warning of danger of walking on the road. Maiden Mother Crone to me suggests the presence of a witch goddess that sort of governs or oversees the road. And with Maiden Mother Crone, we have the aspect of youth, adulthood, and our senior years. Also, of course, as I mentioned, Robert Graves's White Goddess association with this lyric specifically, I think speaks to just the power of some of Robert Graves's work within modern craft, which within the American folkloric traditional sort of current, as I consider that to be like my denomination. I also see this with our trinity of the red, white, and black. The white goddess is the light, the truth, and the way, like how Aradia is the witch's messiah, and she leads us to the dark mother. There's also a T around, the son leading us to the father, like in an Abrahamic sense, and the witch's version that the daughter leads us to the mother, like from this aspect of the white and black and the craft mystery of light and darkness, dark and light, and that duality of these two primal forces. And even looking to the Gospel of Witches, we have even looking to the Gospel of Witches, we have, you know, this origin story of Aradia, you know, being the child of Diana and Lucifer, and how Aradia is this light in the darkness. She is dark and light. She is the night, she is the moon, she is the sun and the glory and the beauty of Lucifer. And she guides her disciples in Italy to her mother Diana, and is encouraged to lead people to the goddess of the moon and to keep the Tragunda, to keep the Sabbat, and to keep the consecration of the meal, which we see as cakes and ale, or we can see that also as the Huzel. So from Aradia to Diana, we can relate to our tradcraft paradigm also of the three souls of the witch, with our bone being our red soul, as the red soul is often linked to being called the bone soul because it's in our very marrow. Our mighty and our beloved dead make up who we are. It's in our blood. And also the witch blood and our connection to our gods, as we are reflections of the divine. So when we have blood and tears and bone, I'm kind of associating this with the three souls: the white soul, the starfire soul above, the red soul, the bone soul within, and the black soul below. That connection with the land and our animalistic nature, where our fetch spirit is connected with. So that red soul being literally bone. The black soul being our tears, with the remnants of our soul in the belief of hauntings and like the paranormal. How can we believe in reincarnation while also believing in hauntings? I think that the three soul paradigm pairs very nicely with this belief, because our white soul sort of goes back to the starfire heavens above and is sort of recycled in this grand source, this grand cosmic soup, and is recycled. And our black soul returns to the earth and is, you know, recycled as well, or could stay here and haunt the land, explaining hauntings. So with the witch's ballad of blood and tears and bone, associating tears with the black soul, with connections with the underworld, connections with grief, connections with mourning the dead. And then with the connection of blood, going back to the origin stories of witch blood and connections of us quite literally being emanations of our gods and the divine blood that we carry within us. That quote too about how like we are stardust, right? Like how we are made up of stardust. And I think that that can also apply as a mystery within this lyric as well. The next quote: "The road is wild and wicked, winding through the wood. The witch's road is dangerous and has a spirit in of itself, as previously stated. The spirit of craft is embodied as its own sentient force." Not to like quote Pocahontas here, but if every rock and tree and creature has a life, has a spirit, has a name, could the road have a full personality of its own through an animistic sort of worldview? It can be wicked and cruel and unforgiving, much like nature itself. The road winds and twists, relating to the crooked path. It lies within the wood of the midworld and the otherworld, the hollowed woods. Could this road be seen as a similar metaphor as the clip-off? The Kabbalistic tree of death and the trials the clip-off be similar to those encountered on the witch's road? Could the abyss that Thelemites refer to and the crossing of the abyss be similar to our experience of walking the witch's road? Those are questions that I have myself. Where all that's wrong is right and all that's bad is good. To go against the norms of society, to embrace what is taboo. Witches of the past and lore were seen as dark and scary, as perverse and blasphemous. To subvert what is seen as holy, to break the shackles of enslavement of the patriarchy, Abrahamic narratives, misogyny, capitalism, to live wildly and loudly and unapologetically in our true will as witches. To rewild the witch, to be feral, to have claws and teeth and horns and hooves, to feast and to fuck, to be that fucking witch, period. Many miles of tricks and trials will wander high and low. So the road will take us through. The road will subject us to tricks and trials. We will have to use our cunning senses as witches to conquer these obstacles. And it's much easier to do so in the company of your coven mates or your coven kin. A solitary witch on the road may be walking the road, but the ballad suggests, and the lore of Agatha all along suggests, that to truly open the door to the road and to walk it, one must share the journey with others as the strength of a group. And the unique aspects of each member is required to successfully walk the road. One will struggle in walking alone. There will be others, be it witches or entities that we come across on the road, that will challenge us, that will present us with trials. In order to move forward on the road, we must work through them and navigate that. The road will take us high and low, to me suggests that great victories and terrible losses are to be expected when we walk the road, when we walk between the pillars of mercy and severity, to march ever forward and to not lose sight of the road. The next quote, "Tame your fears, a door appears, the time has come to go." Fear and disbelief in the power of the witch are killers of magic, in my opinion and in my experience. If you are too afraid to walk the road or the path of the witch, then this is simply not for you, okay? Period. Like, this is witchcraft, okay? This is not Bible study. This is not Kumbaya Church Bible Camp Club. This is witchcraft. It can be scary and you can be afraid. That's perfectly okay. But you must walk and march ever forward on the road. You must walk through fear. And as far as disbelief is a prison. You must learn to suspend your disbeliefs on the road, for what is impossible becomes possible. And what is assumed can become a trap or a downfall. I think that this is a good example in terms of our connections with maybe other groups, other covens, or other witches. You know, they may practice wildly different than you. They may have a different experience on the road, but we don't need to necessarily compare every experience to the lens of what is true and what is false, because I think that that's so greatly shaped by our own perspectives. And our reality, our perception of reality, shapes what is true for us. And I believe that multiple truths can exist at once. Just like I also believe that there are multiple timelines. I've written about a little bit of this in my work, Ambrosia's Book of Witchflight, as well as Ambrosia's Book of Spirits and Ambrosia's Book of Sorcery that is coming out later this year in 2024, and speaking to the various virtues of the other world, similar to how our midworld has our elements of earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. I believe that the other world has virtues like aether, like death, undeath, fell, void, oblivion, nether. Time is one of those virtues. And, you know, am I suggesting that there is literal time travel magic? Yeah, in a way I am, because we have practices of past life regressions that take us back through previous lifetimes. So I think time, just like the element of earth, is a virtue that can be worked with, is a thread that can be manipulated to weave with. We also have time magic with channeling, gnosis. I think that multiple different timelines can exist all at once. And I know that for me, when I was working with my editor and my friend, and we were channeling gnosis in regards to spirits in my book, Ambrosia's Book of Spirits, we were all channeling gnosis. And for me, as the author, it wasn't really important to lay out a solid, concrete, this is the gospel truth sort of thing. There were times where me and my friend and my editor, we would all have wildly different experiences. And I viewed that as, it's not that one of us was right and two of us was wrong. I viewed that as we were looking at different threads of time, different fabrics of reality. And what was more important to me was finding where these threads overlapped, because I think that that speaks to this reality. If multiple witches, unrelated to each other, are channeling the same gnosis without prior conversations, I think that that kind of goes to take unverified personal gnosis a step further into what is seen as shared personal gnosis or group gnosis. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. Again, we have that 3-line chant of down, down, down the road, down the witch's road. And as cited above, I believe this to be a cone of power, but this time, this final time they say this chant, the coven or group has fully harmonized with each other. They've fully woven their hex threads together. They performed this 3 times in the ballad, and I believe this to be a subtle nod again to the power of 3, a symbolic gesture of the forces of the past, the present, the future, that maiden, mother, crone, that blood and tears and bone, creator, preserver, destroyer, puller, spinner, cutter, clotho, lachesis, atropo, the fates. I mean, the powers of 3, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, if you want to throw that in there. There's a T there for sure. Next quote, follow me, my friend, to glory at the end. This line I feel is very literal. It's probably the most literal of all of the lines. And I believe that it's suggesting, let us walk together on the road. Let us grasp the power the road provides, and let us bring glory to ourselves, our spirits, our ancestors, and the road itself simply by walking it. So that kind of concludes my mythopoesis of Agatha All Along's The Witch's Ballad. Now there is an alternate version of The Witch's Ballad known as Lorna's Ballad, and my thoughts on that are in a document and are uploaded on my Patreon. If you would like me to do a video walking through my understanding and mythopoesis of Lorna's Ballad, comment down below and let me know. I would like to ask, follow me, my friend, to glory at the end. That last quote there. What is the end? What is the end of the road? Is that the end of our lives? Do we continue to walk the road in the afterlife as well, per the idea of our black soul and the part of our essence that stays here and haunts the land and haunts it well? Or do we stop? Is that the end? Follow me, my friend, to glory at the end. What is the end of the road? I can't imagine not walking the road. Is the end of the road where we get off of the road? Because once you begin to walk it, the ballad suggests that there is no going back. So what's the end of the road? The spiral path metaphor kind of suggests that it's an ever eternal spiral and cycle, that there really isn't a beginning or an end. It's this spiral of craft. It's this spiral of experience. So if you have an idea of what you think the end might be, or if you have thoughts on my mythopoesis of The Witch's Ballad, I would genuinely love to hear about that down below in the comments. Feel free to make a video response as well to talking about Agatha All Along, specifically with The Witch's Ballad, because I really do think that this is hearkening to a real life witchcraft mystery of the crooked path, the spiral path, the witch's way. This is not just a creation of pop culture, because where did they get it from, right? So many things in pop culture, video games, Dungeons and Dragons, to be really nerdy, I think relate back to a thread of real craft. And so, yeah, I don't think that it's ridiculous at all to pull threads from pop culture. Anyway, yeah, I'm rambling now. I hope that you've enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun to make, and I'm excited to edit this out for you guys. As I'm recording this currently, it is just before Samhain. I'm not sure when this will be posted publicly here on YouTube, but as always, all of my content gets posted to my Patreon first for early release. I hope that you all are well, are blessed, and I will see you in hell. Bye, witches.
Soul ignited and burns as a flame, turns all to ash with its village to blame. Crooked finger bent with intent, sending confusion and chaos where meant. Evils arise and powers imbue, do unto others as they've done to you.